Podcasting from Astrolab Studios, this is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast where we revisit sci-fi, fantasy, and just plain weird shows that have faded from the collective consciousness and didn't quite make the impact that they intended. This week, Frank Herbert's Dune, Part 2.
History will say that the Fremen were about to find their messiah. That Paul Atreides would find his revenge. And the world as we knew it would change. Forever. The saga of Dune is far from over.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast that wants to hear all about the water from your homeland. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
I just before we started recording, I was like, oh, right, I have to think of what's real. But I do have something that I think is real, and it's a little tip for people listening, and it's, if you're planning on watching this series, Luke, I mentioned this to you a couple days ago when we were talking. I found the perfect way to watch this, which is in 10-minute increments. Now, it could be 10 minutes on one day, and then 10 minutes on another day, and then 10 minutes later in the day, but you don't really want to watch more than 10 minutes, or there's a danger you may fall asleep and or die. But if you're like making a cup of tea, put on Dune for a couple minutes, and you have to put a load of laundry in, put on Dune for a couple minutes, and it's perfect, and it's really palatable. Any longer than that, though, I wouldn't recommend.
You think it does work as a miniseries, but just a much longer miniseries?
Yeah, you could watch it forever. It could go on episode after episode. It just, you can only take it in a couple minutes.
Yeah, you want like 55 individual episodes at 10 minutes at a time.
In a way, this feels like it's 55 episodes, doesn't it?
I mean, I'm powering through them.
Are you? Did you watch them all?
I watched them in 2 chunks of 45 minutes.
Yeah, you should try the 10-minute. It's a new thing. I'm going to be advertising.
Your new way of, it's like you do anything but only 10 minutes at a time.
That's it. You're going to lose weight that way. You're going to I don't know, find love of your life.
10 minutes. Watch 10 minutes of Dune. Start cooking for 10 minutes.
Yeah, bathe, but only for 10 minutes.
Life 10 minutes at a time.
We could sell that book.
Sure, why not?
So part 2, and I have a title for part 2.
Oh, I forgot you were doing this. I can't wait.
Yeah. Because the first one was, I don't even remember what I had the first episode. It was like Spice Time or something like that. But this part 2 is called The Balance of Power, and then in brackets, must be contained.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
That is a great title for this part, actually.
So that's part 2, and I'll have to come up with a part 3. But I only have to, I'll come up with in one of those 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, either during one of the 10 minutes or during one of the breaks. So as we're going into this, I kind of decided I probably should do a little history lesson for myself on how this this miniseries came together. Because, obviously last episode I was confused and bewildered by the whole thing.
I don't think you were bewildered. You were more despondent, sad, unhappy, angry. I think there was a lot of anger, mostly directed at me.
All right, Captain Thesaurus. Don't make me get angry again. But I was kind of looking at it, and you know what? The history of it is kind of interesting, actually. It kind of spawned sort of out of the idea of a producer named Richard Rubinstein. Mm-hmm. He was George Romero's producer, from Dawn of the Dead and Martin and all those type George Romero movies.
You're just going to say the Dawn of the Dead movies, the whole series. That's all he really did. He did like 85 of those.
He did lots of great stuff.
Did he? Hold on. He did lots of great stuff? I think we're going to disagree. Did he do anything that was good?
I like Martin. Martin's pretty good.
I never saw Martin.
I'm sure there's some others. I think I've seen a few of his movies. I don't think he's a bad filmmaker.
All right. Well, he's dead anyway.
Rest in peace. Buried right here in Toronto.
Is that right?
Yeah, I went to his grave.
Oh, weird. Please say it has a hand coming out, like a sculpture of a hand.
Oh, well, that's the thing. I just happened to be doing a walk through the cemetery just for funsies, and it was relatively recent to his funeral, so I did come across it, but it didn't have a headstone yet. So it's possible that hand may still come.
Well, I think we have to do a date, you and I. We'll go out to check out his grave and see if there's a hand there.
That's not a bad idea. That's actually like a big headstone with a giant hand like reaching into the ground. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, especially for him, seeing as that's the only movies he ever made.
Getting back to his producer, though, around this time, he had kind of come up with this concept where he was buying up like book franchises. Like he had just produced the Stephen King's The Stand and Stephen King's Langoliers miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing this, he picked up all 6 of the Dune books, and he kind of had this idea that like you could do these books as like blockbuster miniseries, sort of like expansive retellings that get into more of the detail that a movie couldn't. And around this time, the Sci-Fi Channel was also kind of like exploring this thing. So the two of them kind of hit it off. There's some synergy in the kind of the ways they wanted to go with the network and like do these blockbuster miniseries. In fact, this Dune miniseries, we actually owe it something.
What is that?
This sort of idea of doing a bunch of miniseries in the next kind of 2 or 3 years after Dune spawned the miniseries for the Battlestar Galactica remake.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's directly related to the lineage of this first Dune miniseries.
Because it was such a success?
Yeah, I think they had success with this first one. They did one with Stephen King called Taken, and then they tried a few of these miniseries, and Battlestar Galactica happened to be done in 2003, like 3 years afterward.
Interesting.
And, spawned one of the great science fiction television shows.
There's parts of it are great. The latter seasons, I think there are some hit and misses there, but anyway. That's not really important.
Save that for a different day.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't like that they were angels?
Honestly, the first season of that show was so great, and then each season it would just like, what if we just do something annoying? Anyway.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm more forgiving of it, but...
Remember though when they gave Adama that fat suit? Young Adama,
I don't.
Remember? There was no reason. They just gave him a plot line like what if he gained a lot of weight? And so for like 3 episodes he had a fat suit on. It was pretty great.
There was a young Adama?
Yeah, what's his name? There was Adama, the admiral, and then what was the young guy? His son.
Oh, the son. I thought you meant there was like a series of flashbacks where we got to see young Adama.
Oh, no.
But it was still the same
young
actor,
guy.
but he was now in a fat suit and playing a younger version of himself.
No, that would be something. That's something to wrap your mind around.
So the guy who wrote and directed this, he's kind of the creative force behind it. His name was John Harrison. And I think he kind of ended up on this because he knew Rubinstein and actually Romero as well. They worked together. He was like Romero's first AD for a while, and they sort of acted as mentors for him because he came out of the music scene and kind of got into filmmaking later on. In fact, like he'd been directing like the Tales from the Dark Side TV show, and then he eventually did the feature film for Romero and Rubinstein. But basically, he got the opportunity to do this. He wrote the script himself, and then he kind of went out and he was actually able to attract some pretty amazing talent behind the scenes to this project. Obviously, it probably had something to do with the book. He says in some interviews he says that they also quite like the script. But do you want to hear who some of the behind the scenes talent was?
Yeah, I do.
The person doing the visual effects on it had done the visual effects on Terminator, The Thing, and The Abyss before this.
All blockbusters.
The costume designer had done Amadeus.
Oh, yeah, remember we were talking about the costumes. I still think it's my favorite thing of this series is how out there the costumes are.
Well, I think that's because it's great behind the scenes creatives on this. The director of photography is a 3-time Oscar winner.
Really?
He got Oscars for Apocalypse Now, The Last Emperor, and Reds.
I'm guessing you've never seen Reds, right?
I have not. I mean, I think the one that I was most excited for is he was nominated for an Oscar for Dick Tracy.
Oh, so he's Warren Beatty's guy too.
He actually came on board because at a point early in his career, he was nearly the director of photography on Jodorowsky's Dune.
Weird.
So when the opportunity came back around to finally make Dune, he was very excited, apparently. He found out about it, I think, through the guy who ended up ADing it and, like, insisted on a meeting because he really wanted to. Apparently, he had all these ideas for shooting it, in the 70s, and he just really wanted to, like, try to get onto Dune. So he was very gung-ho to join this movie.
I don't know if the look of this, what the DOP would have shaped, I don't know if there's anything particularly evocative about the way this looks. This looks like a TV movie you'd see on Sci-Fi. Do you know what I mean? Like, we talked about the costumes, but like, did you think this looks great? This looks like a 3-time Oscar winner shot.
I don't think it looks exactly like Apocalypse Now.
No, I don't think it looks like Apocalypse Now. No.
I mean, there are obviously some limitations. Like, I think the price tag I read was $20 million to make the movie. The 3 parts, right. I guess, the 3 movies of the miniseries. So I think, the money was stretched, and to be fair, I think they stretched it as well as they could. It does look pretty good considering it's a TV movie with it's on a pretty epic scale, sort of shooting on a $20 million is a budget for 4.5 hours of television.
Right.
And I will say, to its credit, the one thing I think it does maybe the best as far as like Dune goes is those blue eyes the Fremens have.
Yeah, you like that?
Well, did you read about how they made those?
A few weeks ago I did, and then but I don't remember. I know there was some sort of special technique they did, but it's not just contacts,
well,
right?
It is contact lenses, but they're special UV contacts, so they were able to like blast them with UV light and use a special camera that can then pick up that wavelength.
Right.
And I will say, it's the one thing whenever I watch it, the eyes glowing blue, they just look good. They're not like drawn in later. They're not kind of CG'd in. They look practical and they look really good.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I still just really rah for the costume.
Well, that's good. Someone's out there cheering for this costume designer.
Yeah, because even in this one we're talking about, there was some more crazy hats. I was like, man, I thought I'd seen all the crazy hats I could see, but nope, there's more.
Well, let's get into the episode then.
All right.
Here's the IMDb summary for Frank Herbert's Dune Part 2. The Lady Jessica and her son, Paul Atreides, managed to contact the native Dune population, known as Fremen.
It could also be the plot is they walk around a lot, talking about sand and water.
They absolutely just do this in this episode.
I mean, here's the thing. Before we get into it, Luke, I kind of assumed the first episode of this would be a real setup. And it was. There was a lot of, here's all the players, here's why it's important, here's why people don't get along, here's what they're fighting about, blah, blah, blah. I thought the second one would really elevate the action and sort of create a lot of problems for Paul and, your sort of normal 3-act structure. It's not really, though. It feels real stalling, didn't you think?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't think it was any more stalling than the first episode. It felt to me like we'd gone past the first act, that was the setup, and now we're kind of learning what the new normal is. Like, he's got to go, he's got to meet the Fremen, he's got to, like, find his place in their society and kind of rise up their ranks, and that's basically what happens.
Yeah, we get to watch a shot of, like, Fremen marionettes. That was important to get in there.
That was very scary. Those Fremen puppets freaked me out.
Yeah, I'll have to grab that and put it on Instagram at some point.
But essentially, the episode starts off exactly where the last week's ended, with Paul and Lady Jessica kind of recovering from a crash after they flew into that big sandstorm, trying to escape the Harkonnen forces.
Yeah, and they walk away from the crash for about 45 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of decide they have to go find some Fremen, and they just start walking, and there's a lot of desert walking going on. We kind of come to learn that Lady Jessica is pregnant. We see in a premonition that Paul has a floating fetus.
I kept writing his waking nightmares.
Well, it's true. That also is kind of something that involves in this episode, is now he doesn't have to be asleep for premonitions. Like, he can have them while he's awake.
And yeah, and other people notice it too. I think there's at least 2 instances. I don't know the guy's name. The guy who's essentially the leader of the Fremen, whatever the name.
Stilgar.
Yeah, so the guy is kind of balding. He's like, do you have another dream? And then later on, he's with old Susie, the lady he's peeping on, and she's like, do you have a dream? And he's like, yeah. He just keeps having dreams all the time.
He's full of premonitions. The spice is really affecting him and his Bene Gesserit DNA.
Mm-hmm. His Bene Gesserit, yeah.
While they're wandering, though, there's a kind of actually very cute CGI mouse that pops up and comes to visit him for a second.
I loved it. I thought it looked great.
It is one of the greatest effects of the series. Is this little tiny mouse climbs up this rock and looks at it, and it is like Ratatouille adorable.
Yeah. It was so, in a lot of ways, just out of character for this show. This show that is quite, not self-serious, but there's been no weird, like, CGI characters that could possibly be made into, like, plush creature that you could sell for the show. And that's what that felt like.
I was really hoping it was going to take a Ratatouille turn and, like, the mouse would talk and live under his hat and tell him what to do.
Right. Is that what they did in that movie?
Yeah, that's what Ratatouille's all about. A little mouse who makes food.
Yeah, I was too busy watching Reds.
He might be a rat, actually.
Yeah, either are. Don't worry, that mouse thing is important for later on.
Well, that's why I bring it up. It's coming back a little later.
Yeah, what a tease.
But essentially, like, they wandered the desert for a while. They get chased by one of these sandworms, which, like, chases them into a cave and roars at them. And they're like, isn't it weird that this worm smells like cinnamon, which also apparently spice smells like cinnamon?
Yeah, was that... Because I thought at one point, I was like, what, is spice just cinnamon? Is this a cinnamon society? But no, it just smells like cinnamon.
Hey, I'm not ruling it out. I think this whole thing might be about cinnamon.
Yeah, that's a better title for this whole series. Cinnamon.
Sounds like a Jennifer Garner action movie.
Yeah, I watched that movie, Peppermint. It was really bad.
Poor Jennifer Garner.
Yeah, well, whatever, she tried.
Essentially, though, in this cave, what they do is they kind of find this Fremen garden where they bump into a Fremen army. This guy, Stilgar, sort of runs this clan of Fremen, and we met him earlier. He was the guy who came to visit his dad with his dad's old right-hand man, Duncan Idaho.
Hold on, what's Duncan's last name?
Idaho.
Is it really?
Yeah, I realized we never got into that last episode, but the character's name, because they said it a few times, was Duncan Idaho, and I'm like, what a name.
I never heard that once. I heard them say Duncan, but never Idaho.
The Fremen aren't really happy to see Paul and Lady Jessica. They really want their flesh water. They're kind of like hankering for them to die so they can get that water out of their sweet bodies.
Is this the part, Luke, and this is a question for you, does Jessica have some sort of transporting power?
No, this does what?
Because later on, this is when they first meet them, and everyone has like the guns on them.
Yeah.
To help Paul escape, because Paul sort of escapes, does she like transport on the other side of a guy?
Oh, I thought she just grabbed a guy and held him, but maybe I missed something?
I thought she transported because later on Paul has that ability.
Oh, that might explain, because later on we do see something similar to that, so maybe that was here.
So I thought what it was she sort of appeared out of nowhere, like just behind the guy, and then he was to get him get out. But it happened so fast, and honestly, I was watching this in 10-minute increments, so I was not going to rewind it.
Yeah, maybe she did transport herself, because later they'll talk about the magic powers that the Bene Gesserits have. So that I believe that might be one of them.
So there you go. So anyways, they don't escape from them.
No, Paul punches one in the face, and she grabs one of the guys and kind of threatens his life. And Stilgar begrudgingly grants them a pardon so that the other Fremen don't kill them for their water. And essentially, they kind of join the ranks of the Fremen and start walking again through the desert off to the Fremen city of let me see if I can pronounce this, Sechtabar.
Sounds right to me.
So we kind of have a bit of a journey here. We're going to kind of see the Fremen and their nomadic way of life. They seem to have rocks on Dune that you shake them and they glow. That's how they make light.
Is that what it was? They were actual rocks?
Well, didn't you see them? They had those huge like circles.
Yeah, I didn't think they were rocks though.
But really, what did you think they were?
I don't know. They were lights. I don't know.
They just because they were just in rocks all the time. I don't know.
I actually thought it looked pretty good. The set they had of like the sort of semi-cave, carved into stone sort of look. I think at one point they sort of imply that there's even a big statue in the background, but you only see part of its feet. I thought it looked pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, they did a good job with the sets in general. I mean, the whole thing looks good, I guess. Sorry, are you talking about the statue?
Well, at one point they you can see just like in the background, you don't see the whole statue, but you just see its like feet.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Man, I must not have been paying attention to this cave scene.
I think you and I we've mentioned this before. We're noticing very different things. You're noticing rock lights, and I'm noticing statue feet. You know?
Yeah, I mean, this is what this portion is they're kind of just showing the nomadic way of life, and at some point while they're on this journey, they stop and they're like, all right, everybody strip out of your still suits so we can kind of clean them and get the water ready to go. And this is kind of where we're introduced to who is going to be Paul's romantic love interest in this show, a woman named Cheney.
What I like is when she kind of gets introduced, you kind of see her in the background, and they're all taking off their costumes, and she takes off her top, and Paul's like staring at her like a little bit of a pervert. And later on, Jessica's like, I can tell she's one from your dreams because of how you stare at her. And I was like, no, because she was topless. That's why I was staring at her.
It was funny because, I mean, first time we're seeing nude butts and nude breasts in a show.
Yeah, that is the first time.
He's like staring at her, and then she clearly catches him, but he doesn't stop staring. He just continues to stare intensely, and she kind of like covers up and turns away. I'm like, Paul, some shame, please.
I think it's just cultural differences.
Oh, right. He's rich and entitled. I forgot.
Yeah, exactly. He's a little prince. He's like, guess what? You get topless, I look.
At any rate, though, don't be afraid. Cheney definitely comes around to his charms, and they do start a romance in this episode.
Because that's all it took. You know what I like when we've talked about this before, but they spend so much time with people walking and people talking about nothing, just stuff like back history of books that it's not important to this movie at all. But then they're like, we need to develop a love interest. We're like, Hey, Sarah, take her top off. That's all. That's all I need for them to fall in love.
I mean, they try. She also happens to like how moist his skin looks.
That's true. That's true. I like that scene though. She's like, "Look how moist your skin is," and she's going on and on about how good it looks because of the water in his planet. And I was like, she looks fine. Like her skin's just as moist as his. It's not like they pick some dry actress.
It is a flaw in the idea of the Fremen is if they are going to be this water deprived society, you're right. They should have been like a lot drier looking. They should have been like more cracky and like maybe the new movie will get into that.
But anyways, I thought her skin looked good, so she shouldn't be down on herself.
I'm trying to think too, like back on David Lynch's movie. I think the people look genuinely like normal there too. It's a real like missed opportunity.
I don't think there's a lot of shriveled actors that are around, that are just available. Actors that haven't been drinking water.
Just draw some cracks on their face.
That is true. That's what makeup's for.
I feel like I've seen that before. There's got to be some Marvel movie where some guy's just like
get shriveled.
Looks like he's like real dry.
Well, what's his face? Remember the bad guy at the end of Indiana Jones 3? After he doesn't drink from the right cup?
Oh, and
he gets all shriveled. He chose poorly.
See, it's doable. Anyway, while this is going on, we kind of get a quick catch up about the aftermath of the coup back at the castle. Baron Harkonnen has captured Dr. Keynes, the Fremen ecologist, and as it turns out, father of Cheney, who is being sentenced to death because Baron Harkonnen is not buying. They had nothing to do with this whole like helping out the House Atreides, and he sentences him to death by making him go walk in the desert. Have you noticed this about Baron Harkonnen? I noticed it last episode, and I didn't comment on it, but when he's sentencing this Dr. Keynes to death here, his line at the very end of it is he says, "Be sure he recalls these flimsy denials when he's face to face with death's sweet smiles."
Does he speak in sort of some sort of rhyming couplets?
He definitely will end a monologue on a rhyme.
That's weird. I'm gonna have to look out for it now. I have an honest confession. When he starts speaking, I usually just gloss over because he doesn't have anything to say. What I did notice was though, he at one point his robe really comes open a lot, and there you see a lot of his leg, a lot of thigh, and he's wearing a garter. And I thought that was an odd choice.
I mean, he's got that's that costume designer.
Yeah,
they're earning their money on this one. Anyway, Dr. Keynes gets sentenced to walk around in the desert till he dies, and we do get a shot of him looking pretty dried out for a second. But his final death is, I did not see it coming.
I can't. What happened to him? I can't even remember.
He gets out in the desert, and there's a low rumbling sound, and he kind of is just like,
"Oh right,
now I die a true desert person," and the desert underneath him just explodes.
Yeah. So I did write it down. My one note was, wait, why did he just blow up? But later on, they all can like feel the reverberations where they are. But it was like, is this a tremor from the earth, or were there like explosives there? I didn't understand.
Oh, well, this is explained a little later by Stilgard, or possibly Cheney. But the idea is that is where spice comes from. It's called a spice blow.
I did. Man, I don't think I've been watching this thing at all. A spice blow?
Apparently, the spice kind of capitulates under the sand, and then there's some indication it had something to do with the moisture in the air. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but essentially, when enough spice is gathered in a place, it blows up sort of in an explosion and lands all over. That's how the spice gets on top of the sand.
Can I make one adjustment real quick? Instead of what I had titled this, the second episode, can we please just call this Spice Blow? Part 2, Spice Blow.
We'll edit around that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're talking about this spice blow, and Stilgard kind of talks about how the Fremen actually collect a lot of spice too. Like they've been harvesting it because they've been using it to bribe the Spacing Guild, which I guess is some sort of like commerce department of space in this empire. And they're bribing them to knock satellites out of the sky around Dune so that the Harkonnens really can't keep tabs on them. I mean, it seems like the Fremens are actually fairly well organized and not quite as like backwater as we've been like led to believe. Like they're clearly like making deals out in international space or intergalactic space.
It was something I actually had a question about because this is not ruining anything, but as time goes on, they start essentially, the Fremen start doing sort of guerrilla style attacks on the Harkonnens, and Paul is there, and they're suddenly like treating Paul as the leader, but I don't know if his presence changed anything. Like they seemed pretty organized before he got there, and it's not like, I guess I didn't understand why him being there suddenly gave him this prominent position. I'm like, you guys were doing fine without him.
Well, let's go back and we'll go through it, but I think there is sort of an explanation for that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's hard to get into. Like, essentially, he does join the Fremen, and I think they were doing it because he witnesses them doing a few of these guerrilla attacks. I think this has been going on for a long time with the Harkonnen. They have been leading guerrilla attacks. They have been doing these things, and Stilgar can kind of see that Paul has potential and could possibly be this messiah because of his mom.
Mm-hmm.
And Stilgar takes him under his wing, and there's a long montage of like a whole bunch of different raids and stuff. And I think just over the course of that, like by the end of one of these raid montages, we do get this slow motion shot of Paul like in a big cape, like walking toward a guy and slitting his throat. I think the idea is just that like he's becoming a more competent soldier.
Right.
And because he is like charismatic and he's like this royalty guy, he's able to kind of talk people into things, and he's growing in esteem, I think, amongst the Fremen.
Right.
And at some point he will have like a meeting with all the leaders of the Fremen and propose to them to teach them the weirding way of the Bene Gesserit, which is, of course, that weird thing where they can kind of like teleport, I guess, is the weirding way.
But and they also get to use like a Batman voice sometimes.
Yeah, there's things they can clearly do, and I think the weird Batman voice is mind control, and we do kind of get a couple glimpses of this, like, I'm not sure, I called it evaporation, but you're right, maybe it's like, it's teleportation or something. I guess they can move faster than the human eye can see.
Right.
I think what it is he is growing as a soldier, and people are going to respect him, and he kind of can see a way that they can build the Fremen, who's already a pretty well-organized army, into an army that could potentially stand against the Emperor even.
I have two things to say about the guerrilla attacks. One, I really liked the attack where they just popped out of the sand. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And the second part was the actual outfits that the Harkonnens were wearing looked like they were, I have to say, the costume designer did not nail it on this. It just looked like they were samurai outfits that had just been repainted. Yeah,
that's what they were in the last episode too. I like the cool samurai outfits.
Did you? I didn't really like those that much.
They're so gaudy. It's perfect for the Harkonnen.
I guess.
I mean, it's totally impractical for the desert, but
that's true. It's very hot under those masks.
When they originally caught Paul and Jessica, Paul punched one of these Fremen, and they're still on the outs with him at the beginning. And this Fremen who got punched is pretty upset that he got punched by Paul. And I guess in Fremen culture, you can kind of challenge someone to a duel if they've, I guess, insulted your honor or something.
So they do.
And he basically challenges Paul to this, like, fight to the death. Paul's never taken a life before, and it's going to be this big knife fight because all the Fremen really use are knives. Even on their raids, they only really ever bring knives, never guns.
And you should mention it's an underwear fight.
Yes, they're both, it's not an underwear. It's more of a diaper they're wearing.
Sorry. So you're right. It's a diaper fight.
They're nude, except for, like, it's far too lumpy to be underwear.
Right. Well, it's. I think it's just their normal outfit that they've just tucked all in. So that's their shirt and their pants are all tucked in.
This man that Paul's gonna fight, as the fight's about to start, he like leans into Paul and he says, "May your blade chip and shatter." And I was like, "Oof, that's bad sportsmanship. You're supposed to like wish them luck or something."
No, it's trash talk.
He's trash talking him. There's a bit of an extended like knife fight, and Paul doesn't really use his he's still the superior fighter, but he doesn't really use any of his magic powers here. In fact, he doesn't even really want to kill the guy, and it kind of ends with the guy falling on his own knife.
Yeah, the guy does this like big. He tried for what I liked was he did like a drop kick, which kind of worked, and then he like jumped on him and just like kind of like ended up accidentally stabbing himself. I was like, oh, that's kind of an anticlimactic end.
Paul took his life, but it was a little more of a suicide on the other guy's part.
Yeah.
What was kind of cool, though, is after he dies, we kind of get to see a Fremen funeral.
Did you think that was cool? I was like, I don't need to see this. This is sort of stuff, like, I appreciate that in a book, but in this movie, I'm like, guys, just get to it. I don't need to see this. I don't care.
But this is kind of, they've been teasing it the whole time and talking about, like, your body has water in it, we'll take your flesh water. And you kind of see him in this, like, stone sarcophagus they're putting a lid on. But around the stone sarcophagus, all this like water's bubbling out, like somehow this thing is like sucking the water out and moving it into these troughs next to him.
And then Paul's got to drink it.
Yeah, well, as the winner, Paul gets to have the first sip of the flesh water.
Yeah. I appreciate this, and it's some interesting world building and stuff, but like, don't you just want the plot to keep going? Like, enough, keep going.
But I mean, they've been teasing this so much. Like, they had to show us how the water comes out of the body.
I suppose.
I mean, what plot? What are you racing to get to?
Just something happening. They're just walking around, just like talking about stuff. I'm like, just get to something.
I mean, this was one of the best parts.
This was one of the best parts? Ooh.
What else would you put on the list?
That should tell you about this. This is one of the best parts.
How much water came out of that body?
Oh, well, enough for everyone to have a drink.
33 liters.
Is that what they said?
Yeah.
You were paying much more attention to this than I was.
You're only watching in 10-minute segments. You can't even get 10 minutes of your time.
I was doing laundry with it at the same time.
But yeah, this is sort of Paul now has beat a man in the Fremen community. You would think this might turn them against him, but it kind of is the thing that like invites him in. Because there's at this moment after the funeral, they say, now that you're going to be one of us, you have to sort of choose your Fremen name.
And this is the how the mouse comes back into it, because he wants the name of the mouse, and they're all very pleased with that. Because did you catch how they described the mouse? I didn't. I know they were like it was like very industrious or something.
The mouse is quite liked amongst the people because it survives in the desert. In fact, I think its Fremen name means teacher of boys.
Okay,
but yeah, I mean, a funny name, but also it is what Paul's going to become when he starts teaching them the weirding way and stuff. But It's pronounced, the name is Maudib. Maudib?
Yeah. I think it's MUAD''DIB.
Right, so Maudib or something.
Yeah. So Little Mouse. They're going to call him Little Mouse.
He's going to call him Little Mouse. What was probably worked better in the book and maybe not in a spoken word platform is, it's not that there's a lot of tension about whether he's going to end up being this mythical savior, the Mahdi, that they're all like touting who's going to save Dune, but like they're constantly calling him Maudib or talking about the Mahdi. Like they're almost the same word. I'm like, I kept getting confused as to what they're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You actually made an interesting point there, though. There isn't really any tension that he's not going to become this Messiah. Like, of course he is. They almost like they say it. He knows it. The people know it. It's just like it's just a foregone conclusion. So it would have been nice maybe if there was some tension, but I don't even know how you would have been able to do it. That's just what this story is. He's the chosen one.
Yeah, it is what it is. I think when I read the book, I'm sure I didn't quite pick up on Mahadib and Mahadi or whatever it is, just because like I was reading it and not like necessarily piecing it together. But once I heard it out loud, I'm like, oh right, obviously.
Right.
There's a pretty cool sequence here though, where they're finally going to make it to this Fremen city they've been traveling to. And I don't know why they didn't do this sooner, but they decide they can catch some of the Fremen public transit.
Right. Yeah.
Did you like their bus to get there?
Well, hold on. Now I remember like the I assume was some sort of train system. Was it a bus, or am I thinking of a different thing?
I don't know what you're thinking of. They go out one night, the whole lot of them, with a bunch of hooks, and they all catch a sandworm and ride him to the city.
Oh, that's what you meant. Well, that's not really a transit system. I thought you meant...
Absolutely. There's a driver he drives over. He's
not driving
the worm over.
He's riding it.
They all climb on board, and then he's using two hooks and steering it like a bus.
Yeah, he's riding it. He's not driving it. I thought you meant, because later on you see there's that like a little train that goes through the middle of the city, and you see all the poor people. I thought that's what you meant.
No, it's this train worm they all ride.
Yeah, which again looks pretty good. I like the look of the worm.
At this sort of Fremen city, like it's kind of the first time we see maybe Fremen civilization. It's like kind of Egyptian. It's all carved into the mountain base and the stones. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a huge statue that they say is like a statue of the Mahdi.
Yeah,
and it like looks like a guy in a robe with a cow head or something.
I'm assuming Paul will get a cow head later.
He gets a bit of a tour from Cheney, his lady love, and she shows him underground of this place. They've kind of been building these reservoirs of huge amounts of water. This is how they're planning to terraform the planet. Like they've been very proactive. Like they have a plan.
Yeah, and she states that they have them all over the place. Like this is not one. There's like hundreds, if not thousands, of these sort of reservoirs.
Right, and this is the point where she asks him to tell her about the waters on your home world.
This is the part, isn't it, where she takes him to this... she calls it a water cache, doesn't she?
Something like that.
And she starts crying, and then like a tear hits the water, and it like ripples out, and he touches it, and he goes into a waking dream. I was like, what is happening?
Well, yes, she cries because she's thinking about her dead father. Her tear hits the water, and a very like poorly rendered CGI ripples through the water.
Yeah.
But the thing, Paul doesn't reach out and touch the water. He looks down and sees the ripple in the water, and then he just reaches out and touches the air.
Yeah.
And causes the entire world to ripple around him.
Yeah, that's what happens in Waking Dreams.
And he kind of just has a vision of the Fremen sort of chanting the Mahadi name, and it's, another vision of things to come. Meanwhile, though, Baron Harkonnen's non-handsome nephew, he looks kind of like a guy named Biff or something.
I actually wrote Biff down. That's funny.
He
does look
looks
like a
Biff. Whatever his real name is, that's what he looks like.
Yeah, he's shown he's not a very good leader.
Yeah, he's been left in charge to run Dune, and he's mad at the Fremens for running all these raids. So he's just like killing any immigrant to get his hands on.
He's basically trying to make a show for the people of, look what happens when you disobey us.
But this is actually all part of the Baron's plan. He's kind of sent the dumb nephew there to basically make a mess of things, because his real plan is his other nephew, who's kind of this handsome, muscly showboat, is going to come in and take over for his brother and like be the savior that Dune needs. Basically, it's his way of like manipulating the people.
Too bad he spends most of his time either fighting, like his little gladiator ring, or taking baths.
Did you, since you like the costume so much, did you notice what the Baron was floating around in this scene?
What do you mean?
He was floating up in the air, and he had this big red cape on and nothing but a red S&M outfit. Like, it's just like
that's
a leather jockstrap.
That's what I meant earlier. Yeah, like you see a ton of his legs in this, and I was like, wow, bold choice.
Who's fully nude?
Was he fully nude?
All he's got is just like a leather casing over his groin, like an S&M outfit, and then just the cape.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? If flaunt it if you got it,
It looked kind of great. It was the best costume he had.
I said it before. I like this actor in the role too.
Oh, he's having a great time. We jump over now to the Emperor's palace, and the princess has been pretty pissed off because she's pretty confident her dad helped overthrow Dune, and she's been trying to get to the truth of the conspiracy, and she like sends one of her bald handmaids off to spy on the handsome Harkonnen nephew, and she's kind of basically setting up this idea as like she doesn't like how politics is run, and she wants to get to the bottom of like what really happened on Dune.
Right.
But there's a third group of people at play in this conspiracy.
Who are they?
The Emperor's mentant is conspiring with the Bene Gesserit's Reverend Mother.
Right.
Who's still dressed up in like pop star chic. Great costuming for her.
Yeah. She loves those hats.
The mentant shows up to talk to the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother because he's sort of talking about how those weird Bat Boy navigators, they're freaking out a little because they have this vision of a nexus on the horizon.
As you do. So
I think we're supposed to take it that these navigators, I guess they've absorbed so much spice. I guess how they fold space or how they make these wormholes, they seem to be able to see through time and space and like see outcomes.
It's obviously a larger thing, and I'm sure it's in the books, but they've implied a few times that the spice is important not only because it's a form of currency, but also because it seems to affect different species and different cultures in different ways. Am I getting that wrong?
I mean, I took it to mean it's important for trade because without it, the navigators aren't able to kind of do this thing that they do.
Right.
But maybe it does affect different people in different ways. But certainly with the navigators, what they've seen in this ability to like see the future possibilities is there's this nexus around Dune where the outcome is so complicated they can't see the future, and it's causing problems for them. Like, and I'm assuming that's messing up trade routes. At any rate, this is what you're referring to in your title, is that both the mentant and the Reverend Mother are pretty concerned. They actually want to, I guess, probably stop what's happening on Dune for their own reasons, because they sort of talk about how they need to maintain the balance of power if the Galactic Empire is going to run. And Paul sort of futzing around with these Fremen is causing some sort of like chaos in the future possibilities timeline. And as a result, these Bat Boy navigators aren't unable to do what they need to do to like keep trade flowing, I guess.
I think I'd really rather just watch these Bat Boys guys do their thing.
Really?
Yeah, why not?
It's these Muppets.
That's right. Muppets in space.
Great movie.
Yeah.
Not one of the lesser ones, but it's pretty good in retrospect.
I think that was the one. I think that was the one where the Dawson's Creek cast showed up at one point. I could be wrong, but I think that.
I think you might be right. They might be on the beach.
Yeah. I don't know why that's so funny, but it is.
They're very popular at the time.
Kids that talk like adults.
Kids that talk like adults. Is that what that show was? I never watched it.
Yeah, that was like the big selling point. Like, can you believe like how these they speak just like adults? But then you watch it, you're like, oh no, they speak like really bad Shakespearean actors.
Back at the Fremen city, there was a thing here that I was a little confused by, but I guess I more or less parsed it out over the course of the episode. But the pregnant lady Jessica, she gets a visit from this old woman who apparently she's also a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, but she's a different one than the one we've seen. She's a missionary who came to be among the Fremen.
Yeah, I assume it's like just an order of nuns.
Well, I had assumed there was one Reverend Mother who kind of like led the Bene Gesserits, but I guess this means like every individual culture or like planet gets their own.
Yeah, they all get their own. It's like yeah,
because she's clearly from the same order, but she doesn't have at all the same goals that the rest of the Bene Gesserit seem to have. Like, she's on the Fremen side.
And she has a great, she's got like two like pointy hat things coming out of her side. It's very medieval, her look. She's got two pointy, dunce caps coming out of her hat, or her head.
What I liked is she proposes an idea that this series is never really gets into, but I thought was maybe could have been an interesting premise for it. Is that she gets there and she accuses Lady Jessica of basically exploiting the Fremen legend of this savior for her own purposes. Like, she's just like, you're just using this legend you heard about to like position yourself and your son in a good way amongst these people.
I mean, I would agree with her. If I found out that the name Paul gave himself, it's like, they're like, what do you want to name? He's like, my name's going to be Messiah. You're like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, it does seem a little like I get her point. They do seem like they're trying real hard to fulfill a prophecy.
Well, what's interesting is not the Reverend Mother, Lady Jessica actually admits that like, yeah, we're kind of exploiting them.
Does she? She says it explicitly like that?
Yeah, she does sort of explicitly. Like, there's a bit of an explicit like, I didn't want me or my son to die, so we did what we had to.
I find a lot of the times that these conversations give the impression that they're furthering the plot or building characters, but it's doing neither. And that is sort of like this sort of thing too. So if they say, oh yeah, we really were kind of doing stuff on the slide, it's like, but it doesn't change anything. So who cares? Does that point make sense?
Yeah, I think it's more that they didn't use it to its full extent. Like, if there was some doubt or some question of it, then it would have been more useful. But it's more like, this is a line from the books we're putting in here, but we're not really leaning into that idea.
Right.
What happens next is Paul finally consummates his relationship with Chani.
Mm-hmm.
She does this. She takes him out of the city, and she sort of draws. I couldn't quite follow it, but she's trying to explain some sort of like legend or explanation for how spice and worms work. Basically, to say that like spice comes from worms, but she like draws in the sand and attempts to explain it.
What I thought, and this may be true, after watching what I thought she was saying, is the sand comes from the worms. It's their poop. So once again, we have an entire universe based on a poop economy.
Well, I believe in the books that is true. Like, I think is
it true?
Worm poop. Yeah.
There you go. And this may then be part of Space Above and Beyond, and the Chigs are formed on Arrakis because they also have a poop economy.
Well, I mean, then you must feel much like Paul, because all this worm poo talk is quite the foreplay for him, because they have sex right after this.
Yeah, they have tent sex. She's like, yeah, she's like, yeah, so the worms. He's like, yeah, let's get to the tent.
It's kind of interesting because they're consummating the relationship where we're seeing the culmination of this love story. Paul's also talking politics of like all the things he'll need to do, which kind of hasn't come up, but like he's basically saying, hey, Chani, I love you, but I'm going to be a big guy, so I'm going to have to go marry someone who's, you know, a little higher up the social ladder. Are you cool being my concubine?
I don't know the book like you do. And my guess was that, and I don't know what's going to happen. My guess is they fall in love. She's going to die at some point, so he can conveniently then marry the princess and be with the princess, so that you as a viewer / reader don't feel bad about what's happening because she's dead. Am I right? Is that what's going to happen?
I don't remember, and I don't know, but I actually think what they're trying to set up is basically, because Paul's dad never married his mom. She stayed his concubine as well, but they were very much in love. And even when he tells Chani this, she's like totally cool with it. She's like, no problem. I get it. You're going to have to get a wife at some point, but like we're in love, so I'm going to stick around. I think what they're really setting up is that, you know, he's going to have concubines.
Is that it? That's the whole point of it?
Well, I think that's just this world. It's like Game of Thrones or something, right? Like it's just part of the world and everyone's cool with it.
But it is an interesting point that I think it's the scene right after this that Jessica is talking to the Reverend Mother and explains that while she always loved the husband, the reason they never got married was they wanted to always leave him open for the possibility of political marriages.
Well, that's what these two scenes combined kind of are setting up, this idea that this princess who's been running this, like, trying to solve this conspiracy in the background is also going to enter the picture romantically.
Right.
I think what they're trying to ease us into the idea that he's going to have two wives, basically.
This is, I think, maybe the next important part is where the princess shows up and watches old fake Sting fighting, and she's like, before she seduces him.
Yeah, well, she talks her dad into sending her to the Harkonnen home planet for a handsome nephew's birthday. Did you catch the name of the Harkonnen home planet?
Oh, I did. Hold on. I have it written down. It is... Is it Gedi Prime?
Yeah, like Gedi Prime, I think.
Right. And you refer to him as handsome nephew. I refer to him as fake Sting.
Oh, right, because he was played by Sting in...
the 84 Lynch version.
Do you think Gedi Prime is like the main planet in the galaxy that Geddy Lee from Rush colonized?
It's possible. I think if I was on that planet, I had to hear Rush all the time, I'd kill myself.
No, not a Rush fan?
Not really a Rush fan, no. I mean, they're fine. I understand why they're good musicians. I don't really want to listen to it.
I love the wide shots of Planet Harkonnen. It's kind of got a really weird architecture.
It's got almost a industrial feel to it. There's a lot of like sharp angles, and it looks like a place where there'd be a lot of smog.
Yeah, for some reason in my mind, it looks somewhere between a cross between like the Klingon homeworld and then like blackout World War II London.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't look like a place where you could grow a nice garden.
The princesses come here basically to try to get to the bottom of what happened with this conspiracy, and the birthday is a perfect excuse. She's going to come watch his 100th slave gladiator battle as an excuse to be there.
And it's not that good a match. He's quite the dominant fighter.
Do we even see the match in the episode?
Yeah, we see. Oh, you know what? It's not here. We see it. It's later on. We see him fighting with a guy, and he has a fight in the first one and a fight in this one, but it's really quick. Because the princess comes and she's watching him from like in the corners.
What I know she watches for sure is his group bath.
That is true. She does a lot of sneak it around, and she walks in and he's getting bathed by. I remember 2 women were bathing. It might have been 3.
I believe there were 3.
3 women bathing him, and there's a real shot of like his butt, and when he sees her, he sort of like proudly is like, "Hey, check this out. See my naked body?"
I just like the entire time he's standing there getting like water dumped on him, he is flexing the whole time.
Well, he's doing what he can.
I mean, he's really in shape.
Yeah, he's in good shape. She comes over, as a princess does, and is like, without saying anything, is like, "I'll wash you," and he's like, "Yeah, I bet you do."
She starts like oiling him up. It's quite sensual.
But what I like about this is, and I don't know if it's in this exact scene, but they come back to it, that she starts like kind of massaging him, and he's in this bath. And the only thing she says to him are very pointed, direct questions about the attack. Like she doesn't even try to like work it into conversation. It's just direct questions that if he even had the slightest intelligence, he'd realize what she's doing.
Yeah, I mean, he spills the beans on the entire attack on House Atreides, the entire conspiracy. He even like lets her know, we never found Paul's body, so who knows? Maybe he's alive out there.
Yeah, she's like massaging him, and first thing she's like, "So there's a conspiracy right here," and he's like, yeah, of course there's a conspiracy.
Yeah, he gives it up real quick. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Once she gets all the information, he like turns around to like go make out with her. He's like, now let's do what I want to do. And as soon as he does, she like waves her bald handmaid over and like has her stand in. She's like, you stand in for this part. I gotta go.
And he was fine with it. He wasn't like, wait a minute. He was just like, here's a warm body.
Yeah, all the Harkonnen nephews are pretty dumb.
I guess so.
Well, how else would you explain their ability to give up so much information in such short order?
I suppose so.
Jumping back to Dune, though, this kind of leads us to the end of the episode and this climax of the episode, because what's his name? Stilgar he's sort of talking about how the Harkonnens are pretty angry, so they're pushing their forces deeper into the desert, which means the Fremen are going to have to abandon their city and head to the very deep southern desert to stay hidden.
Is this where Jessica drinks out of a bagpipe? Is that what we're coming up to?
What's what we're coming up to? We're also coming up to a baby worm.
Oh, I did love the baby worm. It couldn't look more phallic.
I didn't fully understand. I think it had something to do with what Cheney was explaining to us earlier. They had a little pit full of sand where I guess they had captured a baby worm. To what end, I wasn't clear on. Maybe they had trained them?
They either had bred it from a baby or they captured it as a baby and they were using it to produce spice. It was like essentially like a fish farm.
Right. Since they have to leave, they decide I guess they need to clean up their little worm farm. So they start by flooding the sand the worm lives in.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of cool because the worm swims into the water and swimming around. And at this point, it's got to be like a 15-foot long, like foot in diameter, like Muppet worm that looks pretty cool and long and kind of gross.
And they grab that big old penis and wrestle it.
Yeah, a couple guys jump in, wrestle it real good. And then someone comes in and puts a hood on it.
It was Cheney comes in and she puts a hood on top of it, which seems like it killed it immediately. But I guess the point was like they were drowning it or something. But it was almost just like it hates having its eyes covered.
Yeah, well, it wasn't in the water anymore. It seemed like they put the hood on. Somehow that killed it. And then they're like, all right, we're done. I guess they were just like covering their tracks by killing their worm.
Yeah, anyways, the point is they killed the worm.
And it's not the last person to die this episode. Because they have to travel into the deep southern desert, that old Fremen Reverend Mother, she's not going to be able to make the trip. She's just too old. So they're going to need a new Reverend Mother.
Yeah, so we get another ritual, which seems like it's about the 45th ritual we've seen so far in this episode, which is, I guess, taking the essence or the soul or the memories or something of the old lady and putting it to Jessica. And she's got to go drink what I think they said, and correct me if I'm wrong, look, it was like poisoned water?
Yeah, it's poisoned water. She needs to drink that to prove she can be the Reverend Mother. If she can survive the poisoned water by going into her own mind and like turning it into clean water, I guess, she'll get all the memories of the past Reverend Mothers and become the new one. So it's just a little bit like a Dax or something.
What I like though is, so she's supposed to inside of her change the water, and then they were like, and we'll drink from it, and I was like, are they going to drink her water? But no, somehow by her changing the water inside of her, she also changes all the poison water around them, which they've just like poured poison water in jugs for some reason.
It's metaphysical. It's religious, Jordan.
I suppose. But what's the important thing? So she drinks it and goes into like a vision, right? Almost similar to Paul's waking dreams, but in this, it's almost more like the end of life. Like she actually sees a light at the end of a tunnel.
Yeah, and the Reverend Mother who's dying appears as a young woman now to like touch her chest and like send all the visions into her of the past Reverend Mothers with like a flash of light. But while she's doing it, she looks at the Lady Jessica and says, "Why didn't you tell me?"
It's like she went into a bar and was having a drink, and everyone's upset because they didn't know she was pregnant.
I was surprised that she never mentioned that to anyone.
Well, I thought everyone knew because they like at one point she was just sitting there rubbing her stomach, like clearly like distended stomach. I thought everyone just knew, but I guess it's
apparently
a secret.
that Benny Jesuit like future knowledge doesn't go quite that far.
Yeah, I guess not.
And apparently, though, it's a very bad idea to become the Reverend Mother while you're pregnant.
I guess, yeah, but don't worry, it works out. She, I don't know, doesn't go light, so she's fine that way. Wasn't it they make some sort of comment like the baby has to understand and go through this with you or something like that.
Well, what it is in transferring kind of all this knowledge and all this sort of stuff to Lady Jessica, because the baby's in her body, the baby's going to also essentially get lifetimes of memory and life. So it will be born basically a full-fledged human being.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a advantage.
But in order to do that, in this vision state, this little puppet fetus comes back and starts floating around, and she needs to grab the puppet fetus and hold it to herself in order to like properly ensure they both absorb the knowledge correctly.
Yeah, that was funny.
I like when they add a weird little puppet to these things.
I agree. It's one of the better things in this episode.
And of course, it all works out. Lady Jessica and the baby survive the ritual. The Reverend Mother dies, and a new Reverend Mother has been born. And how do the Fremen celebrate?
They all start. I know they drink the water.
They have a huge orgy.
Yes, they do. But then what's weird about it is they have a huge orgy, but then that's also like the image, the waking nightmare of Paul has. It transfers over to that.
Well, Paul walks out and kind of like walks around the orgy, and I think in the middle of that he has sort of this premonition where they all die and then they all like come back to life or something.
That was it. It's just life. You're having a good time, then you die.
Yeah, and this is basically the end of this second episode, and the setup for, I guess, the final episode with all the stakes now in place.
Yeah, everything's set up now. It's you just can't wait for the conclusion.
We got a Fremen army. We got a Messiah. We've got this Reverend Mother with a baby who's going to be a super Fremen Bene Gesserit. It's all coming together.
You got a worm with a sack on its head. You got a floating fat guy not wearing any pants.
It's all there.
You got pointy hats. You got Fremen marionettes. It's all there.
It's all there. Everything you could possibly want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that about wraps it up for the episode. I will say, my problem last episode, I think we talked about a little bit how I kept feeling like it looked like a stage play that had been, like, photographed.
Yeah.
Watching this episode, I finally figured out, I think, what it is that is causing me to feel like I'm watching just a play or something that's been broadcast on television.
Okay.
Obviously, they had a lot of money. They built huge, elaborate sets. There's, like, crazy costumes. I think they were in, like, Poland or something where they shot it. But I realized watching some of the scenes in the Emperor's house or watching them wandering the sands, how they've shot in the studio is there's no depth to the sets they've built. Like, it's the camera. There's maybe 10 to 12 feet of set, of like built set, whether it be a sand dune or like columns or something. And then butted right up to that, like 12 feet back, is a backdrop. Like a painted backdrop for what's supposed to be behind it. So there's no depth to any of these scenes. Like, it all just feels like claustrophobic and tight, because there's like, if maybe that set had been backed out another like 10, 20, 30 feet, that backdrop would be like a little more out of focus and a little out of the way. But watching it this time, I really couldn't help but noticing, like, when they're climbing up a sand dune, like the sand dune clearly is like 10 feet of sand dune and then just like a drape with a painting of the desert behind them. So there's no depth to any of the scenes. I think is what has been causing me so much cognitive dissonance when I was watching the show.
Well, I think it's that, and I think because of the reasons you've listed, it's staged that way as well. So people sort of, enter from stage right, and they kind of walk and they stand in the middle, and they kind of walk around a little prop they have in the middle, and then they walk, they exit back off into the curtain.
There really is no room to maneuver. Like, you really are on such tight quarters. It gives it that impression. It's kind of, I think that's because I'm having this like cognitive dissonance about feeling like I'm watching a play. I'm having so much more trouble suspending my disbelief, and it's just so much harder to get into this show.
Well, we're at that point. What would you give this?
1.
I knew it was coming. I knew it, but I was still.
I thought about going up to a 2 because I like at least tried really hard to get into it. It's just not possible. It's trying so hard to be a movie, but also like give every little detail of the book. It's not both. It can't do both.
It's funny that I'm going to give it a 4, which is a higher score than you, and I feel like based on this conversation, I hated it more than you did. But I think my point is, I appreciate what they're trying to do in terms of the world building and showing these rituals and rites and all these intricacies of these societies, but I just think there's a much more subtle and much more interesting way you could do this with clever dialogue or a way of just showing something as opposed to telling it. And I just find I get bored really quickly because there doesn't seem to be any sense of propulsion. There's no Paul's not changing anything. He's just walking around, and they go, and now here's a funeral. And he's like, and like, now here's a water ceremony, and now we're doing this, and he just kind of walks around and reacts to these things. And I just find I would have loved for them just to condense this, and it's almost an unfair criticism because I get what they're doing is trying to film the book. That's what this is. That's why it's so long. That's why the way it is. I just think as a viewer, it'd be nice if they just hinted at some of this stuff in the world and just actually focused on the plot.
They're more concerned with making sure they do all the scenes of the book, but they're not selling them. we skimmed over it, but there's a vision he has where this Fremen Reverend Mother tells him, "You're this whirlwind that is going to combine politics and religion." And I'm watching that, I kind of remembered a bit of the book, and that's actually what was interesting about the book. I think probably why it's popular is that Paul isn't necessarily a hero. What he's doing is he's using religious fervor to create a political movement that is going to be this like unstoppable force that is somewhat evil in some ways. Because once you let that genie out of the bottle, there's no, like, he's going to stop this corruption, but what he's going to unleash is a whirlwind that is going to be untamable.
If that's the plot, then have that be the plot. Have the, for him, the ends justify the means.
Well, I think that's the thing, is they're so busy like making sure they get all the scenes, they're not tying them together, they're not giving any thematic resonance to it. It's just when I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, right, that's like one of the major subplots of this book. But because you put as much weight on that as you do on every little piece, none of it rises to the surface. There's no idea we're sticking to.
I think actually that's pretty well articulated, that everything is given the same amount of weight regardless of importance, so nothing seems important.
Exactly.
It's like if you spend as much time on people talking about the smoothness of their skin as you do to the motivation for going into a battle, it's like, well, how is anyone supposed to care about any of this?
It's true. I mean, the one thing I kept noticing was how much they talked about flesh water, and I'm like, that's not that important, but it's all they seem to be focusing on.
I don't know. Anyways, look, we got one more part. Maybe they'll save it, and this last part will really make this miniseries worth it.
I mean, at least it'll be the climax. There certainly will be like battles and fights and stuff.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping.
Well, if you got any thoughts on this, maybe you watched it when it came out and you kind of can remember it a bit better and like what the feeling was in 2000, you can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com. We will have lots of pictures of worms and videos of worms on Instagram and Twitter this week, I'm sure. At Continuum Drag on both those platforms.
That worm transit system you're so fond of.
A little worm bus everyone gets on, goes to work, comes back home at the end of the day.
I'd rather just ride around with those cute little mice.
Yeah, just like pockets full of them. Well, I mean, that's it for this week. So I guess we'll wrap it up. Well, Jordan, until next time, may your blade chip and shatter.
Oh, hey, that's fine.
Continuum Drag is recorded at Astrolab Studios in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Ruxedler. Produced by Jordan Delic and Luke Black. Special thanks to Adam Wheatner, Jeff Hanley, and Dwayne Wright.